Hey everybody, TacticAngel here. We're on the PlayStation 4, here to talk some more about World Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about a premium ship, the Tier 7 Japanese destroyer Yudachi. As usual, we're going to start with a bit of history on the ship, go into some analysis, talk about commander options, look at the stats, and finish off with a bit of gameplay. Like always, there should be a list of timecodes in the description if you do want to skip around. The Yudachi was the fourth ship of the Shiatsuyu class of destroyers built in the mid-30s for the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Shiatsuyu class of ships was an improved or revised design of the Hatsuharu class of destroyers that went into production in 1933. The initial sea trials of the Hatsuharu showed that they displayed many unfortunate seakeeping characteristics, which was not only inconvenient for operations, no doubt made for a very unpleasant ride, but most importantly could lead to the ship rolling over on its own. A great inconvenience for a navy trying to fight a war, not to mention her crew, should such a thing occur. The final 6 ships of the Hatsuharu class were thus redesigned, and redesigned so extensively that they are now referred to as their own class. Laid down in October 1934, launched in June of 1936, the Yudachi was commissioned into service in January 1937. After her completion, Yudachi was transferred to the 2nd Destroyer Division of the 2nd Destroyer Squadron, then under command of the naval legend Raizo Tanaka. At the beginning of the war, Yudachi was serving in support of the Japanese invasion of the Philippines and was present at the Battle of the Java Sea, and it was during this time that Yudachi became the squadron flagship when the previous flagship, the light cruiser Naka, was torpedoed by a US submarine. The version of the ship that you see in the game appears to be the design of the Shiratsuyu class as of the beginning of World War II, though the 127mm main battery were ostensibly capable of firing in an anti-aircraft role. Their slow rate of tracking, limited rate of fire, and lack of sufficient fire control meant that while possible on paper, it didn't really work out like that in reality. Most of the ships would eventually see the torpedo reloads, which you can see modeled on the ship, these diagonal bits where, if you were curious what those are, and the single turret removed for more traditional anti-aircraft guns. Following the Japanese early success during the Pacific War, Yudachi continued in support of operations in the Indian Ocean until the Battle of Guadalcanal. Like many other destroyers and pretty much every other destroyer squadron, Yudachi would eventually find her way to this 6-month-long battle. In this capacity, the Yudachi would help support light troop and equipment ferries through the slot to the besieged Japanese army forces on the Solomon Islands. On September 4th, 1942, the Yudachi was on one such delivery. After delivering its cargo, she was to bombard Henderson Field when it was spotted by a Navy reconnaissance plane. The plane dropped some flares to illuminate the ships. Unfortunate for USS Gregory and USS Little, 2 converted Wicks-class destroyer transports, this also gave their position away. The battle that ensued between 3 Japanese destroyers and a light cruiser versus 2 converted World War I-era destroyers intended for troop transport did not last long, and obviously went pretty poorly for the 2 American ships, with both going down within minutes. The Yudachi would remain in operations in the area for the next few months, up until November 12th of 1942. At that point, the 2nd Destroyer Squadron moved against Henderson Field again on Guadalcanal Island. This was nothing new for the Japanese destroyers. By this point, they had months of experience operating in the Tokyo Express, and they had launched a similar fleet action against Henderson Field just the month prior. Yudachi was one of 11 destroyers under the command of Raizo Tanaka. On the evening of the 12th, they closed within miles of their target. Yudachi believed it had spotted an enemy, and thus turned her attention to it, lining up for a torpedo run in the pitch darkness, and then after launching her torpedoes, turned towards the island, probably because the commander was familiar with these waters by now, and in spite of the pitch darkness, it was fairly confident it knew where it was. What followed next is a battle written about by pretty much every historian interested in the Pacific Campaign, and by people no less authoritative on the subject as Admiral Chester Nimitz himself, though somewhat less understood due to the confusion of dozens of fighting ships, sometimes within throwing distance of one another in pitch darkness. This was the naval battle of Guadalcanal, aka the Third Battle of the Solomon Sea, aka the Third Battle of Savo Island, and several more names, actually. Nevertheless, the best descriptor comes from a generally uncredited American skipper who simply called it a barroom brawl after the lights had been shot out. Yudachi throwing the first punch in what would turn out to be one of the most vicious naval fights and one of the most disastrous in terms of outcome for the US Navy is probably one of the chief reasons for its fame and inclusion within legends. It was at this point that the Atlantic-class light cruiser Juno engaged the Yudachi, only to be driven off when the Yudachi's squadron mate, a Matsukaze, a Kagero-class destroyer, landed a torpedo hit against her. The Juno did its best to limp away, though between the damage sustained there and a second torpedo strike to the ship caused by a Japanese submarine, the ship and most of her crew, including all 5 Sullivan brothers, would not make it to safety from the battle. Yudachi did not get very far, though. Unbeknownst to the Japanese destroyer, she'd been picked up by USS Aaron Ward, a Greaves-class destroyer, and USS Sterett, a Benham-class destroyer, who did more than prove that the US Navy has a near endless procession of gunboats to offer a game like World of Warships. The pair of ships launched their torpedoes and fired upon the Japanese destroyer with their main battery, striking with both. Yudachi didn't immediately go down, and both American destroyers suddenly found themselves in one-on-one fights for their lives, no doubt helping to spare the ship for at least a few hours. Nevertheless, around 2 a.m. on the 13th of November, her crew were forced to abandon ship as they were rescued by another Japanese destroyer, which did try to finish off the Yudachi herself, but managed to somehow miss with torpedoes that sailed under the sinking ship. If only we were all so lucky. The Yudachi was finally finished off by the American cruiser Portland the following day. In total, there were 10 Shiratsuyu-class destroyers built. None would see the end of the war, with 9 being lost to surface action, 3 to American destroyers, obviously including the Yudachi herself, with an additional 6 lost to American submarines. The 10th actually was the Shiratsuyu herself, which was lost after a collision with the Japanese transport ship, leading to the detonation of her own depth charges. So the analysis of this ship is that this ship is very much similar to a Kagero, only more so. The Kagero is a small HP pool, and the Yudachi has even smaller. The Kagero isn't particularly capable as a gunboat, and the Yudachi is even less so. The Kagero is, however, an excellent torpedo boat, and the Yudachi is quite a bit better than even that, and it adds to that by even being a little more stealthy than Kagero. Though I'm not a really huge fan of this sort of gameplay, mostly because it requires either your enemies to make a mistake, or for you to straight up sucker punch somebody who's otherwise playing the game with a wall of skill, I get why people enjoy it. Deleting battleships is pretty fun, and you really only need to have 1 or 2 good salvos in a game to have a respectable damage total. As far as recommendations go, it's pretty easy to look at the Kagero, Akatsuki, or Kamikaze and figure out who's going to enjoy the Yudachi. If you're finding yourself playing those sorts of ships a lot, then this ship is pretty absurdly capable of probably just making you giggle maddeningly, or whatever it is that you do when you play her. As far as an explanation for how the ship is to be played, it is definitely a ship that is intended to be heard but not seen. Exceptionally stealthy and exceptionally fragile, the Yudachi favors a stealthy torpedo build. Its chief weakness is really only that it is such a delicate flower, and if you get yourself into trouble, it is often kind of hard to get yourself out because of your limited speed. With a top speed of just 36 knots, most destroyers are faster than you, a couple cruisers are, and at least one crazy Polish player that I know in a French battleship is as well. With limited ability to run away, a decent amount of situational awareness will serve you well as you moderate your speed and heading to ensure that you always stay just a little bit outside of detectability range. This is also a ship where you will want to pay a little extra attention to locate the ships that have radar, and most likely German cruisers as well, with their excellent hydro. The one really strong downside of Yudachi, a lot of times if you screw up, you don't get a second chance in this ship. When looking at a commander for the Yudachi, the master of torpedoes, Raizo Tanaka, is going to be the standard go-to. He has the largest number of torpedo-related abilities, whether that is torpedo speed, range, or reload. He has a skill for that, and his base trait increases torpedo damage, which really is the icing on the cake. Raizo is going to offer you the best concealment for any destroyer, though it does come at the expense of your total hit points if you want that. In fact, other than maybe On Alert, there aren't really any bad choices in his kit, so just good choices and really good choices. The other dedicated destroyer commander is Takeo Kurita. This guy is all about the guns, and while you do have access to a few abilities, some of which can be used on a torpedo boat, probably the strongest thing that you're going to want from Kurita is his access to twist and track. The additional turret rotation will help you in the odd situation, but you're mostly doing this so that you are aware of where the closest ship is to you. Occasionally, you'll notice that you're in the area of another destroyer. And that is a pretty handy bit of information to know that you're in the area of a boat that's almost certain to outgun you, almost certainly can outrun you, and any extra time that you have to situate yourself and maybe run away in advance is going to be a benefit. That said, the Yudachi isn't an effective gunboat, and Kurita is not likely to make her one. The base commander, Togo Heihachiiro, is certainly an option, and the reason why you'd be doing this is almost certainly for fully packed. Having one torpedo reload booster is kind of a neat trick, but what if you could do it twice? Granted, you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices here. For one, you may have to choose between slower torpedo reloads in general to get access to that, or you're going to have the slowest possible version of the Yudachi. And like I said, that's certainly an issue. The cruisers and battleships can drive you away with their speed and presence alone. Overall, I did enjoy the ability to saturate a capture early on in the game, where there are lots of people maybe pushing it, but keep in mind that they are probably going to be sailing roughly towards you at that point, and present a fairly narrow profile at ranges and angles that you're going to be able to quickly achieve in this boat. Also, the base reload speed of this booster is 6 minutes, so you really do want to pay attention to that if you're going to try to make the most of it. Overall, I found this a little underwhelming in practice. As we get into stats, I will be running down the stats with a fairly standard Tanaka build. Keep in mind the stats are being modified by these choices, particularly the low sea detectability due to the double concealment choice I have here. If you don't have access to double concealment, my second choice would be to probably choose some British commander. Either Tyrwhitt for the marginally faster torpedo reloads, Fraser for trying to make up at least a little of the speed that you lack, or Vine for just a little extra incoming fire dispersion, though that last one assumes that you're going to screw up. With just 13,200 hit points, the Yudachi would rank towards the bottom of Tier 5 destroyers, and where the Kagero previously would have probably held the record for lowest hit points of any Tier 7 destroyer, you slip a full 12.5% lower than even what you're going to find on the Japanese Tech Tree destroyer. Your armor is theoretically better with 13 to 20 millimeters instead of 6 to 20 millimeters, but realistically this isn't going to help you in very many situations. It may actually trap a few extra shells inside of your ship, which is never good. In any case, if you get shot in the Yudachi, count on taking a lot of damage, and know that it's going to take a lot less damage than in most other ships to knock you out. Somewhat of a surprise, the Yudachi is actually rated better than the Kagero in terms of this strange 0 to 100 system that Wargaming uses to give an indication of the ship's power. This is surprising because though the Yudachi uses the same 127mm guns that you're pretty familiar with from the Fubuki on up, in this case, they pick up an extra 100 meters of range over the Kagero, though you only have 5 guns rather than the 2x3 arrangement that the Kagero has, thanks to this strange single turret. The thing that's probably moving the needle here is that, for whatever reason, the Yudachi does have an extra 350 damage per shot on her HE shell, and a bonus 2% to fire chance. Other than that, the characteristics that you see here are the same that you'd find on the Kagero. I guess you could say this does help the Yudachi a bit if you like to fire from smoke, but this isn't a ship where there's going to be an abundance of really prime opportunities to get a lot of use out of your guns. When we go to torpedoes, this is the area for the Yudachi. Essentially, the Yudachi enjoys the same excellent damage, excellent range, and good speed on her torpedoes that the Kagero has, but she has 2 additional advantages. For one, her reload speed is just a bit better, a full 8 seconds here with this particular build. And she also has, of course, that torpedo reload booster, which you can activate at least one time per battle, and that'll drop your torpedo reload from whatever it is to 8 seconds. And though everything else here is the same, there is actually kind of a sideways detour here because you do have access to a different type of torpedo as well. This torpedo will drop your range by 30%, and it'll add a few hundred damage to every torpedo strike. What can probably only be described as somewhat unnecessary, you also pick up 9 knots on torpedo speed. I think this is designed to be a higher risk, higher reward way of playing the ship, and it is an option, but do consider your stealth and speed when making this decision because again, there are plenty of things that can outrun you. As we look at maneuverability, both the Kagero and Yudachi are very slow destroyers, and they do actually share the same top speed that you see here. Their rudder shift is also the same, but the turning circle is a bit tighter on Yudachi, beating out the Kagero by 70 meters, which is actually a really impressively tight turn for any destroyer, honestly. In terms of stealth, the Kagero is very stealthy, and once again, you're slightly better here than the Kagero, shaving an extra 1/10 of a kilometer off of all of these numbers, except of course range of guaranteed acquisition. When we look at consumables, and I've already alluded to this, this is pretty much the reason why the Yudachi is just better than the Kagero. Where the Kagero has an engine boost and the choice between smoke or a reload booster, the Yudachi doesn't need to make any of those sorts of hard decisions, because you come with 2 smokes, 2 engine boosts, and 1 reload booster. Otherwise, these consumables are exactly the same that you'd find on the Kagero. Alright, so let's get into some gameplay at long last. Of course, we're going to be on Greece. This is actually the first game that I ever played on this particular map. There you can see I am in the Yudachi. My build here is actually exactly the same as the one that you saw on the screen, with the exception of Fragile Threat. I don't need all those hit points because I'm pretty confident I'm not going to get spotted. We all make some silly decisions from time to time. In any case, you can see I am moving up towards C. The 2 capture areas on this side is intriguing to me. And of course, being the first time that I played it, I definitely wanted to go over there. What you see right now is I'm slowing down a little. I don't have twist and track, and I'm not exactly sure where their destroyer is, so I'm trying to get a feel for if he's here or if he's on another part of the map. If he's on another part of the map, I can be a little bit more aggressive with C. If he's on this side of the map, then I don't want to sail into his range too quickly because I won't have quite enough time to turn out before I'll be spotted as well. So just trying to make sure I don't give myself away too early in the game. Now you can see somebody's capturing B, but that clearly is a different ship. We haven't quite gotten a feel for, situationally where that other destroyer is. Though this isn't going to give away my position, I am going to go ahead and start lining up some torpedoes on the Jean Bart. As you can see, he's not really moving yet, and I don't think it's because he's not playing, because he has shot some shells. I hope he continues to maintain that position, because obviously at this sort of range, shooting mostly at the front of a ship, it's going to be a lot easier for him to miss some of those torpedoes. Honestly, the server usually leaves them a nice doorway. We follow our torpedoes in there just a little bit with the shell follow view. That is on preset 1 and 2. I use a strange preset compared to everyone else. In any case, it looks like the Jean Bart is starting to play into stereotypes. We have another one that's over here who's a little bit further forward. Maybe we'll be able to get a little bit more love on him. Now, there's really not going to be any good way for me to tell where the destroyer is at this point because nobody's at A to spot to see if he's there. He could be. He could be right in front of me, for all I know. Now, we are in the enemy base. That's not going to help us too much other than to make sure that they don't get any point accumulation. And we're really, really hoping that that cruiser goes the long way around. Obviously, you can see he's getting pretty close to my sea detectability range. And if that was a radar cruiser or if that was a cruiser that had German hydro, I wouldn't even want to be this close because my sea detectability in this is, I want to say 4.9. And obviously, German hydro can get me about, well, more than a half kilometer further than that, I think. You'd be looking at usually 5.5. So that Kutuzov is going around. He is uncommonly brave for Kutuzov. And we're just not going to bother with him for the moment. Our second set of torpedoes, we do manage to land one hit. This is one of the reasons why I find this sort of gameplay to be a little less satisfying, because for the most part I'm just counting on people sitting still or driving in straight lines, basically just playing predictably. But I've made a mistake here because, of course, I was not paying attention to the fact that there is that New Orleans. In there you can see he's close enough now that he can hydro me as well. My smoke screen here is going to be mostly pointless. I do load into the AP because he's close enough and presenting just a really nice target. You can see we land a couple of citadels. The 127s on these Japanese ships aren't actually bad guns. It's just that you're so much better off not shooting them due to your low HP. And as you can see, he stops shooting at me and turns out. Because his detectability with sonar is only 4.5, I decide to stay in the smoke. Instead, we start lining up on this synop. Now, thankfully, I have JC with me. I think JC served a little bit as a deterrent there as well, because obviously he is putting shells on all sorts of stuff and generally doing just the kind of good job that he always does. I do hit my reload booster as that synop started to turn in. I wanted them to be ready in the event that the synop actually did manage to dodge enough of those torpedoes not to die. We did manage to finish him off. We're up to 57,000 damage. It's not a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination, and we've managed to use our excellent stealth for the most part. Our ability to have both of those consumables, both the torpedo reload, which we just took advantage of there, not as much as we could have, and put 16 torpedoes out in the water in just about 10-12 seconds, but we still did get an advantage. You can see the Jean Bart is slowly flooding, which is nice, and we managed to finally cap the base, which is one of the biggest things that you need to do in a destroyer. Now at this point, everybody is really, really far away, so I will go ahead and speed this up. The enemy team is pretty well taken care of as well. You can see it's just 2 ships versus 6, so I probably won't be spoiling anything to tell you that we go on to a win here. As far as the Yudachi, I mean, this ship is exceptionally capable, and when I say exceptionally capable, I think it's so much better than the Kagero as to be sort of silly. It's a play style that isn't going to appeal to everybody. I hope we don't see just an absurd number of these, and I fear that we probably will. I'm not sure that Tier 7 is made more fun by the proliferation of massive amounts of reload boosters, whether it's main battery reload boosters or now torpedo reload boosters. So, I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. Here I'm going to leave you with the screens. You can see there we were on the top of the charts. we actually do walk away with a little bit of money in spite of the high service costs. That has helped significantly by doing, a pretty good job in the game and also having a premium account. So maybe this all makes a difference to you in terms of whether or not you want to go for her in the campaign. But in any case, we're going to leave with something just a little different, and we'll start that up. But before I go, I do want to say I hope to see you guys on the next one.